Okay. All right. So today then, what we're looking at is some information from Sean McAvoy, and what we're looking at is this question. You go into the theatre in 1599. What is it like? What is the acting like? Well, he claims that the consistency of characterisation and style was not really terribly important, but what was important was narrative drive, engaging the audience, and dramatic impact. Well, I think narrative drive is just a kind of posh way of saying telling the story, and I think in any play, any performance, that is important. So yes, I can quite imagine that that might be a justifiable comment. The next thing he says, engaging the audience. Well, they did have to engage the audience, because what we know about the audiences at that time is if they weren't engaged, they would be very vocal about that. They might chuck things at the stage, they might boo, they might talk all the way through it very loudly, or they might just go, I suppose. Dramatic impact. He says it was about the dramatic impact. That's where we maybe have an issue. We've got to find out whether or not that was true or not. Were they really focusing on the dramatic impact? We need to look at that. What we know from what is actually said by Shakespeare through his characters in Hamlet is that in those days the perception was that you go to hear a play, because we're looking at a culture which is ostensibly an aural culture rather than a visual one, so much more aural than they are visual, and the belief is that people went, on the whole, to listen to the beautiful sound of the words and the combinations of the words, and of course the meanings of the words as well. So that was important, but were they that interested in the drama? That's the thing that we need to find out. In addition to that, though, we can say that we've got to modify this idea, though, that audiences went just to listen to the play, because Hugh McRae Richmond, in his book, says that the actors were often very acrobatic. They fenced, which means sword fighting, and in fact they did get professional military men to teach actors how to stage or to fight, which they then did on stage. So therefore I suppose it becomes stage fighting. So they had wrestling sometimes as part of it. And there was a lot of dance involved, and sometimes dance was there because it represented sex. Sometimes it foreshadowed elements of the story. So, for example, just before Romeo meets Juliet, then there's dancing at the ball, and so that would tie in with that. And in addition to that, at the conclusion of a play, there was often a dance which was a reaffirmation of social order. So the idea is that you start the play, all kinds of things go wrong, the world is in chaos, it comes back together for the end of the play, and then there's a dance to unify it. In addition to which, there was the jig, which was very often an improvised piece of dancing, and very often comedic, and that was performed at the end of a lot of shows. And strangely, you could watch a play like King Lear, maybe, which finishes very tragically with almost all the cast dead on stage. It would finish, and then there would be a jig, and the idea being that it created a lighter sense for people to go out. But the lightness that it created was very often problematic, because apparently jigs at the end of plays were banned in 1612, 4 years before Shakespeare died, because people were coming out of the playhouses and sort of getting into drunken fights and damaging property, and all kinds of bad things were happening. In a way that we tend to associate with things like football hooligans now, rather than with playgoers, who are a very sort of sedate little bunch of people, aren't they? We have to look at this question now, though. We know that they actually weren't just interested in listening, they wanted to see this spectacle. There's also song, and I want you to look at the use of song and the use of music in Shakespeare's work as your kind of questions for what you're going to do in relation to homework. But also this thing about the beauty of the voice and declamatory acting. So one of the things that we're looking at is there truth in this idea that actors were chosen more because of the beauty of their voice, and because they could be loud, and because they could declaim, so they could be heard by these audiences? Was there more importance in that than acting ability? Because if that's the case, what we would have seen on Shakespeare's stage was people that could be heard, people that could be seen, but not necessarily good quality acting. They might do the basics. Now, In our modern production of Macbeth, we haven't talked about this today, but in our modern production of Macbeth, one of the issues is that there were dancers employed for the production who then acted some of the text. And here's the issue. Dancers are trained to dance, and they're very good at that. Actors are trained to act, and hopefully they're very good at that. But when you get somebody who is a dancer that is asked to perform in a play, unless they have a very good training as an actor and a dancer, which is not so common, they don't tend to do justice to the text in the way that an actor would. So we find that in the production that we saw, we felt that the dance and the music was a really kind of interesting part of the performance, but the acting fell short of our expectations. Well, in Shakespeare's lifetime, what was that balance there? Was there a balance between drama, the visuals, and the beauty of the word? Or was there one aspect which was stronger? So we go into 1599, and what do we see? Do we see a lot of time and energy spent on all the physical stuff like wrestling, acrobatics and dance and jigs and so on? Or do we see a lot of emphasis on the acting and drama and telling the story and the narrative thrust of the piece? Or do we see people speaking in a beautiful way for the majority of the time and just kind of keeping their audiences happy by this lovely sound, this combination of these beautiful words being spoken by people in various different fairly stagey poses? We now need to try to work out what would we actually see in 1599.